And welcome to another episode of Patriots 4th and 2. Derek Haven, Steve Balstieri. As always, we are your hosts of the podcast here, brought to you by PatsFans.com. I want to please ask everyone to subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, as well as like, share, or leave us a review on Apple Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Keeps us high in those rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. We've been doing our draft preview podcast the last couple of weeks, and we'll continue to do that. We just had one the other day, and we'll have some more next week as we kind of dive into the defense. But today we're going to be talking about a couple of big things from a roster standpoint, from a team building standpoint, and also the breaking news of Stefon Diggs signing his contract going to the Patriots. But as always, before we do anything, I have to ask Steve, how you doing, man?
I'm doing better than I was a little while ago.
Well, you were in the dentist chair for 3 hours, so
yeah,
like a bad way to start off your Wednesday.
Yeah, 3 hours in the dentist chair is not the way to start off your morning.
No.
That's a story for another time. I'm also doing good because the Patriots made another big signing with Stefon Diggs.
So obviously, I think that's what like most people are kind of reacting to right now, Steven. Let's not kind of play around it. Let's just jump into it. With Diggs signing a 3-year contract with the Patriots, you said it was up to $69 million, about 26 guaranteed. Coming off the ACL, he's 5 months recovered. Seems to be ahead of schedule. He's feeling good. From someone I spoke to that has a pretty good knowledge of the situation, the contract and everything was really. They were kind of hammering out final details, but he pretty much knew this about 12 hours before it even went through. It was just about how they're going to get there. I want to go ahead and preface the conversation by saying this. I'm not the biggest Stefon Diggs fan from a person standpoint. That seems unfair because I've never met him. But from a player standpoint, I mean, he catches everything, runs great routes, whatever. I think he brings a little edge, a little nasty to this offense that they really need. And offensively, let's be honest. I mean, they've taken some swings at the apple at that position, and they haven't really been able to land one. So, you talk about. Let's see. You go to Calvin Ridley last year, signed with Tennessee. Okay, it didn't work out there. Okay, you wanted to go ahead and make a move for maybe Brandon Ayuk. It didn't work out. All right. Well, now how are you going to go ahead and kind of slot that receiver room? I think even if Diggs is 31 and on quote unquote the back nine of his career, I still think he's a productive player. I mean, as you said to me offline earlier, he was on pace for his 7th consecutive season. Of what, 1,000? Was it 1,000 yards?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so he's pretty much caught 100 balls, ish, 1 to 130, and he's been pretty productive from that standpoint. So I think he brings a little fire to this room, Steve. I think people should be excited because what it does is I think it helps kind of slot everyone, kind of knock them down a peg a little bit, which is what we've talked about, and brings a little fire to that side of the ball.
Absolutely. And I look, yeah, I've been saying, you've been saying, everyone's been saying they need to upgrade at wide receiver.
Yep.
And we know this. They got to get Drake Mace somebody who defenses are going to have to account for. And Diggs is that kind of guy. And look, in the grand scheme of things, we know they're still going to have to draft a wide receiver.
Sure.
And might not necessarily be a first-round guy. It might not even be a second-round guy now, depending on how the board falls to them. I mean, I could see a situation where, they could either go for one of the top 2 players if they're still there in the draft with number 4, and then take a tackle in the second round, and then, go for a wide receiver after that, or a running back. We don't know how the board's going to play out yet.
Yep.
Or they could obviously go for a tackle in round 1. But Diggs fills a big hole from a leadership, standpoint. Look, regardless of what we've heard about him being a diva and demanding the ball, everywhere he's gone, they've always said he practiced hard and he practiced, um, with keeping the young guys in tow, basically showing them,
And based on what we've kind of heard, like that room needed it.
yeah, everything we heard last year, right? The wide receiver room was a mess. Well, now
Yep.
they have an established vet, a guy that has put up incredible numbers in the NFL. And, he's coming in. So these younger guys, they're going to have somebody to look up to, hey, this is how you handle this situation. And as you said, he runs incredible routes. That part of him hasn't changed. He might not be the 1,500-yard guy he was a few years ago, but that's okay. They don't need that guy. They
Mhm.
just they need a reliable guy that's going to stretch, the short and intermediate parts of the field
Yep.
and run good routes, get open. I mean, that's what they need. They
I
need
mean,
some that's going to
in the
get
words
open.
of Bill Belichick, the receiver position is get open and catch the ball, and he does both of those things very well. And I look, Russ, who obviously has a big part of the show, even if he's not on all the time. And I don't want to speak for him per se. I'm sure this is not his kind of player, but at the same time, what my argument would be for him, if I was gonna go ahead and say like, okay, here's the pro conversation. The pro conversation is that he comes in and he's a reliable target who does those two things really well. And as you and I have talked about on defense, there are guys that bring some nasty, some attitude. And they play with that. Keon White, Milton Williams, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, Carlton Davis. Those guys play with an edge. Jabril Peppers, another guy. Okay, maybe not Christian Gonzalez, but okay, and that's not a knock against him, but like that is one of those things where defensively you have a little bit of that. And I think that there is an important swagger, concept to that whole thing. Offensively, who really scares you? At least I think Stefon Diggs, I don't care if he's 31. I don't care if he's coming off an ACL. To me, Steve, it gives somebody from an opposing defensive coach someone to game plan for. Be like, okay, we have to worry about where 14 is lining up on this side of the field. He can play outside, he can play inside. Again, very consistent in his productivity. And I think that it will help that room in general just kind of grow as they figure out how they're going to go ahead and build this offense moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line is, look, they still have, depending on who you talk to, over $70 million left in cap space for this year.
Yep.
So that money isn't going to help you with the draft.
Yep.
You need to set aside some cash for that, but all that amount of cap space, it's not going to help you in the draft. And if you can sign a player that's going to, fill a big hole, and not saying it's completely filled now, but it's, he takes a lot of that edge off of that, with using that cap space, then you have to do it. Have to, you know.
Well, he seems like
Um,
he'll be a good fit in the offense too, just given he has some versatility to him. I think Kendrick Bourne, he's coming off the ACL last year, so it wasn't his best year, but he had a really good year under Josh. I haven't given up on Jalen Polk. We talked about that offline. I think he's in that conversation. Kayshon Boudy's kind of a toss up at this point. I think Pop's going to have a huge year. That's just me. But I do think it's important that they go ahead and have this guy because I do think, again, it knocks things down a peg, and that's really what you want. And I'm kind of curious. I guess for you, does this change anything about the draft for you?
it doesn't change. I mean, they still need a young wide receiver. There's no doubt about that. But it's not like a glaring need right now. Okay, it's still a big need, but it's not the way it was 36 hours ago.
Do
You
you
know what
do
I
you
mean?
think though that it how's the way I want to phrase this? I suppose, I guess it would be one of those things where, yeah, it's not a glaring need, but at least goes ahead and gives you, I guess, a little bit more time to figure it out. Is that
Right.
fair?
And I think they're still going to draft a wide receiver. And
Okay.
you know, if by some strange coincidence of nature that Travis Hunter is still there at 4, I
Yep.
still grab him. You know what I mean?
I mean, that would be, I mean,
I mean,
it would
that would
be dynamic,
transform
be different.
that would transform your offense.
No, no doubt. No doubt.
You know.
No doubt. I guess if you're talking about the Diggs contract, though, as far as his timeline, seems like he's gonna be ready to go by the start of camp. People are so worried about the recovery of the ACL. To me, it's become so routine where guys are pretty much back at a certain point. He hurt in October. I think that he's gonna be ready to go by the start of camp, even if he only plays a little bit during camp or does some mild route running, and then he doesn't play in the preseason. I still think he's gonna be productive for you for there, and I think Drake will benefit from that guy having someone that he knows he can actually count on. I don't want to discredit that point too, because I do think that is a component of this whole situation.
Oh, I think those two will be joined at the hip.
Yep.
Even if he's not ready to go and training camp, I expect to see those two talking all the time because one thing, Diggs knows how to get open, but he can also talk to the quarterback about what he's seeing defensively. Oh, they're doing this, you know maybe you should think about doing that. And Chad Graff from the Athletic, he wrote a
Glad you're
piece.
bringing this up. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, he wrote a good piece this morning because he covered Diggs in Minnesota, and yeah, he was a diva, but he talked about him also being a team guy. Then in the wild card game, and I think it was 2020, I think they said.
Was that the one where he chucked his helmet when they won that crazy sideline?
No, he said that they were getting smoked early against the Saints, and Kirk Cousins had no time to throw the football, and they caught Diggs on the sideline coming up to Cousins, and rather than saying about I want the ball, you need to give me the ball, he said, look, don't feel like you have to force crap, he didn't use that word, to me. You just play your game and we'll be okay. And so there's that side of him too. So I think
he brings. I think the thing about Diggs to me is that he also brings a competitive fire that I think Vrabel really wants in that room, just to spark something. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I could see him, firing everybody up on the sideline.
Yep.
And stuff like that. And look, they had a mammoth hole there, and this guy is going to do a really good job of filling it. And I just think it was a really smart move for the Patriots. Look, we know they tried to chase down several different wide receivers, and
you're actually leading the horse to the water here, because I was about to bring that up, but continue.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think there's talk about this being a desperation move. I don't believe it was a desperation move. I think that they realized they needed to up the ante a bit, because for one, like you said earlier, pretty eloquently, I think that you said, what's the cap space going to do for them for the draft? Okay. So they tried Ridley, they tried some of these other things, but maybe they were like, you know what? Maybe it's not a perfectly desirable situation at this moment, but it's trending in the right direction. So if we go ahead and we get him closer to 16, the word on the street is that Diggs's camp wanted 16 for at least 2 years guaranteed. He got 26, so we got 1 3/4 guaranteed. The third year, they'll go ahead and have a conversation. We'll see, because I think the one negative thing I would say about Diggs is that at the Vikings and Buffalo, he kind of wore out his welcome a little bit, and we'll see if that happens kind of down the line. But I think that for now, they were like, you know what, we need to go ahead and add some kind of juice to this side of the ball and really go ahead and do this. And I give them credit for being a little aggressive here and saying, like, we're going to make this work no matter what.
Yeah, and again, I mean, you know, things are a little bit different now for Diggs, right? He's a little bit older. He's coming off a serious injury, and he wants to, show everyone that he's still, Stefon Diggs. So I think he's going to be just fine this year. I mean, I'm not worried. And he might not start the season on time. But if you look at the videos of him working out and weightlifting,
Yep.
On that leg that he just had surgery on, just, what was it, 5 months ago?
Yep.
I mean, he looks a lot farther in his rehab than I would have thought at this point.
Well, we saw him doing some cuts. We saw him doing some cuts on a turf field. We talked about the video of him doing those like Bulgarian like split squats, where he's kind of working on those stabilizer muscles for the knee, which is incredibly important. What would you say, Steve, to the people that are worried about what his presence or ego might negatively impact May? Because I think that I can understand that philosophy in general. I also don't think it's going to really hurt him as long as he's producing. And I guess I'm not worried personally about him from a production standpoint once he's healthy. But I don't think there's going to be an issue with him in May. I think that they're going to be able to, because as much as Drake kind of comes off as like a ho hum shucks kind of guy, just like a really good kid, I still think he wants to go ahead and win and succeed and do well. And I think Diggs is only going to accelerate that and help him reach that level and kind of levitate him to that point.
Yeah, and and they needed an influx of talent around him. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been saying that. I mean, we've been saying they need an influx of talent at wide receiver for a couple of years now.
Sure.
So I mean, now they got one, and I was surprised by the vitriol last night that I was seeing on social media.
Why do you think that was? I mean, let's kind of just pull back the curtain on everything. I mean, why do you think that was? Why do you think there was some negative reaction to that whole thing?
Oh, there wasn't some. There was a ton of it. And again, I think
we've been over this.
Yeah, it's, look, they were clamoring for the Patriots to make a big splash, and then they got Milton Williams, right? They got Harold Landry, they got Spillane, they got Carlton David. Oh, they haven't got a tackle yet. They haven't got a wide receiver. The Patriots are in that mode in Boston now, that no matter what they do, there's going to be a dark cloud associated with it, so they went out and they got a wide receiver. Now it's like, man, I was seeing all of these comments last night. Diggs is washed. And I'm like, this guy, other than his injury last year, he was on pace for his 7th 1,000-yard season in a row. When was the last time the Patriots had a 1,000-yard, season from a wide receiver? Julian Edelman in 2019.
Wow.
Okay, and this guy has done it. He was on pace for 7 in a row, and so like I don't get, well, I know where it's coming from, because they've been fed that steady diet. Some fans, of negativity around this football team, no matter what they do, it's going to be negative, right? I mean,
I think what some people, I'm going to use the term some people because I don't want to get yelled at, but I think what some people fail to realize is even the people that they really liked for the receiver position were more talented than they're giving him credit for. I actually think it's a discredit to someone like Edelman to be like, oh, he was just this guy. Like maybe even Wes Welker. You want to turn back the clock a decade? We go to Wes Welker. Wes Welker essentially emphasized the slot receiver position and I mean, I'll never forget Larry Fitzgerald on ESPN. I think he was on SportsCenter because the Cardinals never made the playoffs, and he was on set and being like, Wes Welker's a top 5 wide receiver in the league, but no one wanted to give him that credit because he wasn't, Randy Moss mooning the crowd, but that's it. Sometimes
Well,
there
he
is a
didn't
little
fit
bit
the
of
mold.
talent. No, he didn't fit that mold. Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
And, same with Edelman. I mean, Edelman was, I mean, you go back to that Super Bowl, well, a couple of them, the one against the Seahawks,
Mm-hmm.
the one against Atlanta. I mean, you talk about coming up big in clutch times. That was Julian Edelman. That catch he made, against
The one
Atlanta.
when Cam Chancellor hit him on the side of the helmet that he absolutely should have been taken off the field for a concussion. That one still is. I still think that's a better play than the Falcons one, and I'm sure I'll die on that hill alone. But to me, I was like, man, he got smacked and he got up and he was stumbling 9 yards forward, but he knew which way he was going, so I'll give him that.
Well, I remember they had him wired for that game. And it came out afterwards, and the Seahawks knew. I mean, that's Brady's go-to guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were laying the lumber to him all game long. And at one point, Edelman's like, he's under a pile of Seahawks, and he's like, "That didn't hurt, man. That didn't hurt." And when Chancellor, I think it was that play when he laid him out really good, and he's like, you could hear, I think it was Chancellor saying, "Well, what about now?" And he goes, "Okay, man, that one hurt. That one hurt."
So we're in draft season, so if we want to tie things full circle, does Diggs really dictate or change anything for you for the draft? Because for me, it doesn't.
No, I still, like I said, I still think they need a wide receiver.
Yeah.
They could use a speed guy, and I'm thinking a guy like, well, the two guys from Texas, Golden
Who
or
Vrabel was
Bond.
at? We're recording this on March 26th, so Vrabel, that was the 25th. He was at Texas Pro Day, and there's a
Yes.
lot of guys. There's a safety from there that I like. There's a corner. We talked about Gunnar Helm for a while. We talked about Isaiah Bond. We talked about Matthew Golden. I mean, there's a lot of guys from Texas that are intriguing.
Yes. And if they were to come away with one of those two guys, this wide receiver room would be looking a heck of a lot better, because then you'd have your speed guy, you have Diggs, who's the great route runner. I mean, and you still have guys who are good 3s and 4s,
Yep.
And that was the problem. They had a bunch, the wide receivers they have, a lot of them are good 3s or 4s, maybe stretching it for a 2, but they're still good receivers. And if you add those other pieces to the pie, all of a sudden now this wide receiver room looks like it will be difficult to defend. And so I look at it. Yeah, they still need a guy. I like the addition of Mac Hollins. I think Hollins is going to play a big role, especially in the red zone for this offense. I mean, he's a big dude. He runs good routes and he gets open. And he had his best season of his career with Josh McDaniels, with the Raiders. And,
let me ask you this, and this is one of those typical Derek things where I catch you off guard, but who do you feel about for locks in that receiver room? Because Diggs obviously is now one. Hollins, I think, is another.
Yeah, yeah.
Just given the fact new regime, they signed him. I think that they kind of knew what they were doing with that. I think Pop I would put in that conversation. I would put Polk in there, but that seems to be a very differing opinion. But I just don't see how they let someone who was a top 40 pick from the previous year go. Even if he doesn't work out, I'm not saying I believe him more than most, and I think he'll kind of snap into it. But I think he's kind of a lock. But I think after that, I don't think Kendrick Bourne is a lock. I don't think Baker's a lock. And then you go down Keishan Booty and some of the other guys. I just don't really see that. Do you have any kind of differing opinion on that whole front?
Honestly, I think, well, they just signed Mac Hollins. And they gave him a pretty decent contract.
Yeah, so I think him and Diggs are pretty much solidified.
Him and Diggs are locked for this year because they just signed them. So
yep.
They're not going anywhere. And other than that, I think the only other lock, and by virtue of where he was drafted, is Polk.
Yep.
And I think, the rest of it is going to play out on the field in training camp. I think it's going to be super competitive.
Yep, we talked about that earlier offline. I think training camp is going to be a freaking fun one. If you're in that area, that's going to be a good one for those. I miss those one-on-one corner receiver reps because I feel like it's going to be a really, really heated, in a good way, heated in a good competition way to bring out the best in that room. I think it's going to be a fight. And as I continue, I me, I love to pat myself on the back. But I think you and I have been all over this for weeks now. Is I think that the roster is going to continue to turn over, and I think Vrabel's going to be like, "All right, let's see the hungrier dog. Let's see who wins."
Yep.
Do you want to get into linebackers, or what do you want to go next?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about linebackers because they re-signed Christian Ellis and
yep,
and
Ellis got good money. They basically essentially gave him, seven-ish guaranteed. So he's going to be around.
Yeah, he's not going anywhere.
Yep. And then they brought in Jack Gibbons.
Yep, Zach Gibbons. The linebacker room is going to look extremely different this year. I think, they're opting for aggression, speed, and well, they've already talked about the violence, and I think guys like Spillane, Gibbons, Christian Ellis, they all fit that mold.
I think the biggest question for me at linebacker is, do they picture Marte Mapu is in the picture, and is someone like Jawan Bentley in the picture? Because I think that's kind of TBD.
Yeah, well, on Sunday in my Sunday column, I wrote that it wouldn't surprise me if either Jelani Tavai, Jawan Bentley, or possibly even both aren't on the roster this year.
Right.
And because they're going in a totally different direction from what the Patriots have normally played for the past 25 years,
Well, and as you and I speculated offline yesterday, I don't think it's out of the question that Bentley is a training camp trade, for a late day 3 pick for next year.
Yeah, I mean, somebody was writing about that yesterday after we spoke. I read something on the line of they've already gotten feelers for him.
Yep.
So I think it was for Tennessee, and again, it wouldn't shock me because, this defense is going in a different direction. They're going to be a little bit lighter. They're going to be faster, more athletic, guys like Ellis and Gibbons and, they're sideline to sideline guys. And Spillane is a lot like that as well. So,
right.
I just look at this linebacker core, and you're wondering, how it's going to play out. But I think Landry and Anthony Jennings, they're kind of like your edge setting guys. Landry is obviously a good pass rusher as well, but then you have Keon White, who's a good pass rusher. So they're going to be aggressive, and I think that's why they want the linebackers flowing, downhill, disrupting stuff. And I'm not sure Bentley fits that mold that they're looking for. Now, would he accept being a backup? I don't know, because they paid Spillane way too much money for him to be a backup. I mean,
well, part of me wonders if, again, this goes back to a conversation we had the other day, offline and online, when we did our prospect preview of the offensive line, and we're talking about captains and everything else. I just wonder if maybe Vrabel feels like they just need a culture shock in that room to just go ahead and totally overturn everything, just to kind of, I guess it would be, for lack of a better phrase, it'd be kind of like a wash, rinse. Like we need to let things kind of breathe out and just kind of start fresh. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, I think Vrabel's putting his stamp, on the roster. He wants his type of
His own guy.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
So,
well, let's take a quick break here for podcast purposes, and when we get back, I'm going to surprise Steve with something from just came out from LSU's Pro Day, which we will work into our draft conversation coming up right after this. All right, we're back here on Patriots 4th and 2, brought to you by PatsFans.com. Again, please do subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like, share, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. It keeps us high in those rankings so other Patriots fans can find us. So, Steve, what just happened? And actually, what's kind of happening as we speak is Will Campbell just measured at 33-inch arms at LSU's Pro Day. So now, friend of the show, Evan Lazar, last spring, he was at 32 7/8. The combine, he was 32 5/8. And now he's at 33. So I'm not sure if he's just doing a bunch of, just hanging from a pull-up bar and stretching those things out, or what's happening. But everyone's been talking about that 33-inch arm length. So I guess I want to get to you. What's your kind of first reaction to hearing that? Because to me, I find that kind of an interesting conversation for a couple different reasons.
Oh, his agent must have put him on the rack there, to stretch him out a little.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think it makes any difference because the guy can play. I mean, if you're looking for a left tackle that can play, this guy can play. I mean,
right.
He's gone up against the best pass rushers in the SEC for 3 years since he was a freshman, and he's only given up 5 sacks in 3 years. I mean, you're looking at the tape, and the tape don't lie.
Yep.
Sure, in a perfect world, you'd want him to have a little bit more length of there, with his arms,
sure,
and his wingspan. But the guy can play, and if I'm the Patriots, I mean, I wouldn't have been worried about the arm thing to begin with. And again, I go back to 2 people that we greatly respect here, and that's Dante Scarnecchia and David Andrews. David Andrews was, asked this the other day, and, they both said, Campbell's going to be the guy. I mean,
it just makes so much sense to me. I know there are some people that just really hate this. To me, I still have Carter and Hunter as those 2 guys that are in that conversation, but I think that you also have the conversation if both those guys are gone, where do you go next? And to me, Campbell is the obvious pick at that point.
Yes.
I wouldn't even hesitate. And I know, again, it's not. Is he the Tyron Smith prototypical left tackle build that you would like mold for like a Hall of Fame guy? No. But is he someone who I think brings the attitude and physicality and tenacity that Mike Vrabel probably wants to instill in this team. I think he does. And again, going back to Evan Lazar, and I never want to speak for him. I'm just going off his Twitter page, but I saw this about 45 minutes ago, and I couldn't agree more. He said, "I've never seen anything like this Will Campbell arm length stuff. We have 3 different measurements with opinions all over the map on if it matters or not. At this point, you either like the player or you don't, regardless of the arm length." And think that perfectly I think that perfectly encapsulates the entire conversation. If you don't like him, then you don't like him. But to me, I'm not even worried about the arm length. I think he's a good player, and I want to put him in the offense. And I think that if you want to tell me that you would rather take Travis Hunter because you think he could bring a different a different skill to a position that maybe is quote unquote more positional value, okay. But at the same time, if those guys are gone and there's not 2 quarterbacks in the top 3, then to me it's Ghost Campbell. And I just don't see how you take someone like Mason Graham or Tedero McMillan or wherever you want to go. I just don't see how you go that direction when it seems like Campbell to me is the best, is the best, at least at what he does at his position in the draft.
Exactly. And look, I'm with you on that. I think if like Carter or Hunter is there at 4, those guys are projected to be generational type talents.
Yep.
And so you don't pass up on a guy like that, even if it's not, quote unquote, the position that you're really looking for. But at the same time, you just can't do that. So
Right.
I would take either one of those guys if they're there. And if they're both gone, I'm go right up to the podium and not have a second thought about Will Campbell.
Right. And I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, honestly, I just think that if you look at this team, they just need to go ahead and plug holes however you get them. And look, as we mentioned in our conversation previously, it's like, yeah, I mean, would it be great if there was a top flight, person at one specific position? But there's really not. So you just have to make sure you hit on it. That's the most important thing. If you don't think that Will Campbell's a tackle, you think he's a guard, and you don't want to take a guard at 4, I can understand that. I flipped out over Cole Strange a couple of years ago, even though that you and I talked about him as a potential day 2 guy, and I still flipped out because I'm like, why would you do this? But at this point, if this is the pool you're picking from, so you have to go ahead and make a pick. What are you going to do? Just pass? Like, I mean, I guess the other thing too is that if you were looking at, let's say they were the number 1 pick in the draft and they could not trade. Okay, so in this scenario, you can't trade. Have to make a pick. Give me your top 3 guys of who you want to take. Because to me, it's again Carter, Hunter, Campbell.
Yeah, I would go those 3 as well. But for the sake of this,
the conversation,
factor, we'll say that Carter and Hunter are already gone. So who would be your 3 guys? Well, I think it would be Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would, possibly be Banks from Texas.
Yep.
And the third guy,
maybe Armand Menbu.
But he's more of a right tackle, and
but even that conversation has kind of changed a little bit. It feels like,
yeah.
So, but he has me. I mean, he has the size.
I reach a little bit because I think it's a little early for him to go. But again, the kid from Texas, I don't know if you'd want to draft a wide receiver number 1 that early, but
no, I think that if you're going to go like Matthew Golden or somebody like that, then maybe that's a conversation. Like if they take a position early, do they trade back into the 20s for a Golden or for a Josh Connerly, like we talked about, the tackle from Oregon, from that whole thing. The guy, I think I don't think this is going to happen anymore because of the moves that they've made in free agency. But I think Jalen Walker's a little bit of a sleeper too. Georges has had a ton of a ton of good defensive players
Yes.
come out, and he's athletic and kind of a freak and kind of a guy where maybe he doesn't fit like the quote unquote traditional mold of one certain position. But I have a hard time given the Spillane signing, given what they gave to Christian Ellis, given the Gibbons thing. I just have a hard time kind of fitting him into that equation.
Yeah, I mean that's entirely possible.
And then
But
Mason Graham, I would put in there too. Like I said, Mason Graham, I think would be
yeah,
in there too. But I think the
and
biggest
I
thing
think
about the
Mason
defensive line
Graham,
is the Christian Barmore health thing,
right?
which we
Yeah,
don't know.
now if you're not sure about Christian Barmore's health, then yeah, Mason Graham definitely enters into that conversation.
100%.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's like when it comes to Mason Graham, I saw so many comments on him, right? Oh, he's undersized, he's 291 or whatever it was. Milton Williams is 293.
Right.
It's the style that they play that, still makes them, really intriguing players because they're not read and react to gap guys. They're
And I
coming
think
off
that's
the
different.
ball.
It's not, this isn't Vince Wilfork. This isn't Devon Godchow. This isn't someone who,
Right.
you know, this isn't the same kind of scheme. So I think that's, a factor in this whole thing too.
Yeah. If you're two gap and you don't want Mason Graham, you wouldn't want Milton Williams either,
Right.
But if you're going to be aggressive and come after the opposing quarterback and try to blow up running, the running game in the backfield, then that's the guy you want. So,
Right.
Again, if they're concerned about Barmore's health, then I think Mason Graham definitely enters that conversation at number 4.
Yeah, and I guess, again, the Stefon Diggs thing that we talked about originally to start the show, it does kind of dictate what they could potentially do it for. I think it just gives them more options, and they continue to talk about taking the best player. They have a lot of needs to fill. How they're going to go ahead and build that room. And again, I know I'm being a little repetitive, but I just think they just need to hit on that player no matter what. As long as they can play, it doesn't really matter.
Well, and a lot of people are coming around to Gianti, right, at number 4.
Well, let's have that conversation too. So if you want to talk about Ashton Genty, at 4, I know Mike Dussault lit the world on fire on Twitter, who I was talking to earlier. He lit the world on fire with his thing, and people like flipped out. I don't think that's ridiculous because even though I dislike it, because I think there are better, I would say better players. I would just say players of more priority, I guess I would phrase it. I can understand just being like, hey, like this is going to be a guy that can be your bell cow for the foreseeable future, and that can take some pressure off Drake too.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I'm with you. I didn't agree with it just because I think they had bigger holes elsewhere.
It's also a pretty deep running back class. So it's like, is that really the best way to maximize your value? And again, we're talking about if they have to stay versus if there's a trade on the table. We can't play with hypotheticals. We could sit here all day long and do that, but we don't know. But if they have to stick and pick, is that the guy you want to allocate your best asset to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It all depends on how they feel about the player, but I thought it was awesome by Deuce, right? Because he just got the conversation going and he threw a curveball into the mix like, what do you guys think about this? And more power to him because that guy, as much as I admire watching his tape and what he can do, I didn't even give it a second thought
right
that they might go in that direction. But good
I
for
just
Duke.
I have a hard time for 2 reasons. For one, I think that again, there's more positions that they need that are a little bit higher priority they need to address. And for 2, it goes back to the Elliott Wolf thing that I until I'm proven otherwise, I have a hard time thinking that he's not going to go to the old Packer way, which is, I'm not saying it's wrong. Draft in the trenches. I don't care if it's offense or defense, and then take those skill positions round 2, round 3. And
That's
that's
the
where I
Packer
kind of
way.
fall back on.
Yep. And that would mean Will Campbell.
Yep. And that's where I get back to. I think people need to prepare themselves for Will Campbell. If Carter and Hunter are off the board, I think the pick is Campbell right now. I know we're 4 weeks away tomorrow, but I still think that's kind of the way I'm leaning. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I know you're kind of pushed for time.
I am. So we have a few more minutes, though. If there's anything else we want to talk about, or we can wrap it up now.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean, they still have some money tied up in free agency.
Yep.
Right. So I'm wondering if there's any other moves that are still out there.
I think what's probably going to happen is I think the receiver thing was a little bit different. Again, I don't want to say they felt pressured by external stuff, but I do think there was that narrative that they needed to go ahead and kind of get guys to kind of flock that way. I think for me, though, I would say that I can't see them making any big moves like the Diggs thing until after the draft if they can't fill certain holes that they're hoping to go ahead and fill before the season starts.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there. I mean, unless somebody falls into their lap, they're going to be released or whatnot. I don't see any big moves, but they could still sign some more depth guys that might be out there. Although there's not anyone that jumps off the page, that I'd be clamoring for them to sign, but you never know. Because they do still have a ton of money. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I think if they're going to make a big splash move, it'll be after the draft. If they feel like, hey, we could still use some help at this position or that,
Sure.
But I like what they've done with the secondary. I really like what they've done with the linebackers and defensive line. So I think the defense is looking so much better. And now they're starting to fill out some offensive stuff, and I don't think they're done by a long shot.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that front. Any other rumors or anything else that I'm trying to think of? I feel like there's been so much Patriots news. It's never a dull day in Patriots offseason talk, so we know that. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we maybe glossed over.
No, I mean, look, they could still use some help along the offensive line, but I think some of the interior guys that are already here, that they're probably feeling better about those guys than we're giving them credit for.
I think so too, and I won't say the name, and I know because we talked about it, privately, but I mean, there are guys in that room who, for one, don't feel comfortable, and for two, don't really know because I think they want to see the cream rise to the top and kind of throw them into, I guess I'll roll back the time frame a little bit and go to the Dante's Inferno and just see, hey, how is it going to shake out in the training camp field? For a lot of different positions and show a little bit more fight because I think there was too much complacency and too much confusion with all the changes they've had over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and then last year there was so many injuries. They had no continuity. Granted, they didn't have the most talented group, but when you're constantly switching guys in and out because of injuries and poor play, whatever, it's like it's hard to get anything going, especially in the running game where everyone has to be pulling on the same page. So let's hope this year it's a lot different.
Yeah.
And I think with Josh McDaniels, back as the offensive coordinator, we're going to see some really good stuff coming out of the offense now with Drake May and the players that they do have.
No, I'm with you there. Well, I guess we'll wrap this show up, and we'll come back in a couple days, Steve. We'll have to we'll tweet it out whenever we're able to do the next preview. But we're going to focus on the defensive front seven next, which will be exciting. A lot of ton of interesting guys to discuss. I guess any final thoughts from you?
No, it's just that news that you know that they had signed Stefon Diggs. I mean, that was a huge move for them,
Mm-hmm.
and it, at least for a little bit, it's going to quiet the crafts are cheap talk, and it won't last.
No, it
We
won't.
know that because this, Boston sports radio it's not going to change. But I mean, they went out and they grabbed the number one guy, on defense that was a free agent. They
And
signed him
Milton
to a
Williams.
big
Yep.
money deal,
Yep.
and then they signed Stefon Diggs and a bunch of other guys. That's like what 14, I think, or 15 guys that they've signed in free agency. This team is going to look a lot different.
Yeah, that turnover is going to be crazy. I think, as we talked about, I think there's no winning. If they take a line, if they could take Will Campbell, they could take, Mason Graham, and they'll say, well, that's great, but who is Drake May going to throw to? They take Travis Hunter and they want to play him at receiver. Okay, well, he played better at cornerback, so who's going to block for him if they do that? Or they could take Ted McMillan, and it's the same kind of discourse. It doesn't matter what they do because we know what the backfire is going to be.
The columns are already
regardless.
Written.
Yeah, it's done. We know the format. At least we know it going into it.
Yeah, I mean the columns are all written depending on who they take. So, and then who will, be lambasted. So, I mean, that's just par for the course. But look, from where they were just a few weeks ago to now, this team is vastly improved on paper. They haven't got on the field yet. We all know that. But if you're asking me, is this a better team than they had last year? Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess we'll have to see what comes up next. I'm sure there'll be something. There's always another shoe to drop here in Patriots Nation. So we know that.
Never a dull day.
Nope, never a dull day. So again, thank you for everyone listening to this episode of Patriots 4th and 2. We will catch you guys next week, and we'll be back with our prospect preview of the defensive front seven. Talk to you then.